It's really great to be here for this. Al's right, I got off the plane from Myanmar last night. Actually, Myanmar and Bangkok, and I'll start there, really. I mean, we've all talked since the first time that I think it was Donna who first talked to me about Plan, wasn't it? When we were in Ottawa, and I didn't know about the organization at the time, and I was particularly interested because my youngest brother Anthony was born with mental and physical disabilities, and I think a lot of us in this room would say that he shaped the life of our family completely. Certainly was the finest person in our family by far, I would say. And my brother and I, if we're at all useful or decent people, it's thanks to our brother. And you know, when you're growing up and you're boys, you are of course right about everything, and your parents are wrong about everything. It's the nature of being a boy, right? And but one thing we always knew was that my mother just died age 94, and she was had a lot of tragedy and things in her life, but the reason that I knew that she was a remarkable mother was that at a time when there were absolutely no services, positive services as opposed to negative services in this country for people with handicaps, they were all punishment services, that she was a ferocious mother, I think, just like Donna, for my little brother Anthony. And you know, there were all these people trying to have him, you know, you had to put your handicapped, your retarded son away, right? Because that's what you were supposed to do. And there were these places built in Ontario and in Canada that were basically prisons for people with disabilities, horrible places. And she always just gave him hell and said no and spoke out loud, and nobody asked her to do it except as a mother, and I think that's as a family. So I'm saying all this because, in a way, this is what Dawn has written about, in a way, the reality today of what's a family that has somebody with handicap in the family, and what does it mean about society? I mean, there's no question that this society's become better. We now have some services. We have some ability to deal with things. There are homes for people to go and live in with dignity and happiness. And Nicholas is now in one in Ottawa. And I'm sure. I think it's working out, right? Yeah, it is, which is great. I mean, none of that existed. So we've made enormous progress. But on the other hand, you know, Donna went through hell at various points, fighting against these structures that just really didn't want to accept that there were complicated situations that didn't fit into neat patterns. And she found her way through all of that, as did Jem and as did Natalie with her, and as did Nicholas. And you know, it's all very well for all of us or any of us to be, you know, humanists or conservatives or liberals or social democrats and say that we care, but it's how do you make a society work as a place that cares? It's not romantic. You know, societies aren't places. Societies are not essentially about love. I mean, we don't know very many people. Pretty hard to love people you don't know, right? So the societies have to be about respect. They have to be about empathy. They have to be about that ability to imagine the other. And it's true, I've just come back from Myanmar and Thailand. And, you know, it's my first time back in Myanmar since about 85, because I was on the blacklist since I said so many horrible things about the military regime. And because I was one of the people who wrote about Burma before Aung San Suu Kyi came back, and before that it was off the map, and there were 2 or 3 of us who wrote about it. And you know what? It's amazing to be. I don't know how many of you've been there, but it's amazing to be in a country which, since 1962, has been under the most horrible dictatorship, and both vicious and violent, but stupid as well. They basically took one of the richest and most educated, interesting countries in the world and just destroyed anything that got in their way. They weren't even smart enough to, they're all dishonest, but they weren't even smart enough to steal a lot of money. I mean, they were sort of mediocre beyond belief. They'd sort of steal 5 million when they could have had 50 million. You know, they were really low-level criminals. But so they dragged everybody down, or they would kill them, and the prisons are the equivalent of being killed. And you know, I remember that country, what it was like, and then going back to it, what it's still like. That people have to be incredibly strong for themselves, families have to be incredibly strong, and communities have to be incredibly strong. And you know, we have a new Penn Center in Myanmar, and the president of it, Matidao, is a doctor, been in prison 5-6 years almost. They let her out because she's quite famous and she was going to die, so they let her out. And the number 2 in the Penn Center was in prison for 10 or 11 years, and there they are, looking pleasant and relaxed, and you know, you think, how do they do that? And then you meet, you know, Aung San Suu Kyi, 18 years alone, house arrest, alone, you know, and you think, how do they do that? There's a kind of self-control and dignity, and there's a sense of society, of caring for the other, of believing in the other, right? And it's not over by any means. I mean, it could all roll back into horror. And then I was in Bangkok with a friend of mine, old friend of mine, called Father Joe Meyer, who some of you may have heard of, who's this great slum priest. He doesn't create Catholics. He actually works with the mullahs and the Buddhists and in this enormous slum in Bangkok called Klan Toi, and which I wrote a novel about. And now they run all the slums in Bangkok. And it's really all about caring. You know, the government of Thailand for years denied there was any such thing as AIDS, and it was Father Joe who forced the government to admit there was AIDS. And families would come and dump their children or husbands who were dying of AIDS at the door of the AIDS hospice. He was the first one to create one because there was no AIDS in Thailand. I mean, there were millions of people with it. There were none. There was none. So people would just come in the middle of the night and leave the sort of dying bodies in front of the hospice. And the next day, Father Joe's a really funny guy, actually. You have to have a sense of humor when things are desperate. And the next day, he would go with his people. He'd talk to the person, find out where they came from. They'd carry the person on a stretcher or whatever back to the house, lay the person out in front of their family house, and then they would all kneel and pray in front of the house, thereby humiliating the family totally, right, for abandoning their child. And eventually, the family will have to come out and talk, and they say, look, if you'll admit that your son has AIDS or your daughter has AIDS, then we'll take them into our care, providing you come and help. But if you're going to deny it, then we're just going to leave them here in front of your house and you're going to be humiliated forever. You got to be tough, you know. This is what Donna writes about, how tough you have to be to care. Empathy is not romantic, it's not soft, it's about really, really being tough. And I think this is not said enough, but everybody thinks it's sort of, you know, lovey-dovey. And I mean, people who are involved know it isn't, but the society kind of thinks there's something soft about it. It's about toughness, caring and toughness. And the families say, okay, I guess we have to admit the truth, and therefore we will assume responsibility, and therefore he will help us. You know, and in a sense, and so there he is, you know, 50 years he's been doing this working with AIDS and poverty and child prostitutes. And you walk down the slums with him, he gives a hug to some little old lady. He says, she's a drug dealer, you know, the ex-person. So, no, they runs a brothel, you know. I won't let them take communion next week, sort of thing, you know. Really tough situation. But what at the base of all of this is this idea of how does a community work? And I think this is what Donna is writing about in this book. How do people come together? How do they plan the future in very difficult circumstances? And the fact of the matter is that you judge societies by the way in which they deal with the toughest situations, or the most complicated situations, the less self-evident situations. You know, this is a society which for the last 30 years has loved to talk about business and prosperity and jobs. But I mean, really, none of that works if you can't say, how are the people who have difficulty fitting into the mainstream, how are they going to do well? How are they going to be citizens in our society? How is somebody with cerebral palsy going to be the citizen they deserve to be, have the right to be? They're as much a citizen as any one of us. And they have, in many ways, much more to contribute than a CEO. Because a CEO might well be a middle-class person, or I might be, or whatever, might have had a fairly nice upbringing, not too much trouble, did okay at school. Yeah, had to work fairly hard. Whereas somebody with a disability has to work much, much harder, has to be much more conscious, and has more difficulty making the contribution that they have the right to be able to make. And it isn't about speed and ease citizenship. It's, in a sense, about the feeling that you have something to contribute and that you want to belong and you want to contribute, and will other people help you to contribute? I think this whole movement, the plan movement, the citizenship movement, that come out of it, the idea that citizenship is not a meritocracy as defined by our universities, which is not leading us anywhere very happy, as we can see, that citizenship is about empathy, caring, the toughness of difficulties that have to be met, dealt with, so that people are included. And we have to find ways to make that inclusion work, because that will make us more intelligent, more effective, more interesting, and more caring. And I think all of that is in this fantastic book, The Four Walls of My Freedom. When friends say they're going to write a book and they haven't written a book before, you start worrying, And when I looked at this, I thought Donna had really pulled it off. I mean, she'd found the way to do something very, very difficult, which is to put on the page both her feelings, her experiences, her family's experience, Nicholas's life, and the reality of the society she had to deal with and that he has to deal with, and what can be done in that society. Because at the end, this is this very rare kind of book, which is both about a personal experience and what society needs to do. Pretty hard to put those two things together, Don. It's not actually self-evident. There are a lot of professional writers who've tried all their lives to do that and not actually succeeded in pulling that reality of the personal experience together with the reality of what can and needs to be done. So I'm very proud of you and of Nicholas and your family and this movement, this community, and Al and Vicky and all the other people who I've met over the years, and I'm very, very proud to be associated in any way with the work that you do. So, Donna.
I have had a great interest in trying to learn from the developing world, from people who suffer from extreme poverty, for example. What can we learn from that experience for ourselves in Canada, in a developed nation where we have most people are of the middle class, and we have certain expectations of what life can and should bring us. And those were some of the ideas that I reflected on long and hard. And you, John, and Adrienne as well, in her work on citizenship and diversity in Canada, have been really inspirational for me, and in helping me think, where does our family fit? Where do we fit? Where do we belong? How does somebody like Nicholas fit in Canada? So, like everybody in this room, I have loving relationships in my life, and I am a mother, and I know that there are other mothers here in the room, and I know that there are mothers of children with disabilities in the room, and fathers too. And for probably, I don't know, maybe 17 years of Nicholas's life, I thought that we did not belong. We had no place in society. Nicholas's disability was an accident of nature. When someone would say to me, even in my own family, "How are you, Donna?" I would say, "I'm fine. I'm great. We're good. We're really good." And I never said, what was actually happening in our family. And if I knew that if I did, people's eyes would kind of glaze over. They really didn't want to know what was going on. They knew that we were in virtually constant crisis, but they didn't want to know the unromantic reality of our daily life at home. And, that was hard to bring together with, if you show the picture of me holding Nicholas, that's me with my new baby. I mean, my baby is perfect. My baby is my beloved. And so, Nicholas, and in that photograph, I didn't know that Nicholas had disability. So one's reality is and whole future expectations and whole life concept is dramatically changed with a diagnosis of a severe disability. So I'd like to introduce you to my family today. And it's a relatively recent picture. That's our Nicholas. He's 25 now. And me and my husband, Jim Wright, and our daughter, Natalie Wright. She's 22 now. Sometimes it takes an idea to shift. It does for me anyway. I mean, I think that the way I operate is within the architecture of ideas. And I had the idea that we were outsiders and that no one could possibly understand our life. And why should they? Why should they? I should not expect other people to understand what our life was like with Nicholas, particularly when he was very ill and in extreme pain. So, I mean, Nicholas has had 76 hospitalizations. He has been very ill over his life. He has had 9 major surgeries, including orthopedic surgeries that basically went wrong and left him in severe chronic and acute pain. So we were outsiders in the hospital because people tend not to want you to come back if it hasn't worked, and you keep going back saying fix it, and they can't. You become a little bit of a persona non grata with medical professionals, and it is a very, very difficult thing to find a place of belonging. So I have to tell you, though, one day I was waiting for Jim to receive his cap and gown at a ceremony to give him an honorary doctorate at the University of Ulster in Ireland, and in Northern Ireland. And the woman beside me is a sociologist and began to talk to me about my interest in social policy. And she said, I'm doing some work on disability and the work of Amartya Sen. And so you must know Sen. And I said, no, who's she? I've never heard of this person, Amartya Sen. So she said, no, it's a man. It's an Indian man, and he won the Nobel Prize in 1998 for economics for a theory called the capability approach. Actually, it's not a theory, it's an approach. And so Amartya Sen basically looked at the extreme poverty in India and the lives of people living within those circumstances, and he thought that household income was not a very good way to understand the reality of their life. He thought it might be better to ask those people how they could have a life they valued and have reason to value, and then base programs, policies, and services on those answers. And when she said that, I had a real moment of, I guess, epiphany, that I glimpsed the possibility of belonging with that idea. I thought maybe if I could look again at our family life and understand it differently. If I could understand that, if I asked myself, I asked Natalie, Jim, and Nicholas, what is a life that you value and how can we make it? And if we asked everybody who had circumstances of adversity, and I'm thinking particularly disability, in Canada, what is a good life? And certainly Al Atmansky and Vicky Kamak have been leaders internationally by asking that fundamental question in the disability community and beyond. What is a good life and how can we make it? And so I decided to write a narrative using aspects and events in our family life to introduce a new way of looking at the experience of rearing a son or daughter with a severe disability. What do capability approach programs, policies, and services look like? What actually happens if you ask people what is a good life? I mean, I think we're going through a little bit of an exercise like that right now in Ontario with the Select Committee that is going across the province. I testified to the Select Committee, and a lot of people are saying we need better coordination in services, we need personalized budgets, we need, many people had various ideas about what is required to create a good life for people with disabilities and their families who support them. And I proposed that we need a reconceiving of the way that we think about giving and receiving care in Canada. I am Nicholas's mother, but I'm also the daughter of my mother, who is 92 and lives in Montreal. And when I go back to Ottawa tomorrow, I pack to go to Montreal on Monday to look at nursing homes for the next stage in her care. To me, these are people I love. I care about. I love them all, both, and I need support from our extended family. I need support from the communities where we live. I need support from provincial governments, from federal governments. And so it is a question of reconceiving how we think about care and deciding and making a decision, however unromantic it is, that care is an issue that concerns absolutely everybody. It is not us and them. And, it's interesting. When I gave a book talk in Ottawa, my immediate family was sitting in the front row, my sister-in-law and my brother-in-law. And I was saying how pleased I was and grateful that they had come. And I said, we are all caregivers. As Rosalind Carter said, we either all have been a caregiver, is a caregiver, you're a caregiver now, you will be one, or you will need one. So it is a universal area of concern for every single human being. But I said, so here's my sister-in-law, and she cared for my mother-in-law when she became very ill and died, and my brother-in-law cared for his mother when she became ill and passed away. And I saw them look at each other, and they kind of went, well, wait a second, this is supposed to be about Nicholas, right? This is supposed to be about disability. This is not about us. And the thing is, it is about us. It's about every single person. So that's why there's a chapter in my book about elder care. I think we just simply need to look at all of the assets in our society all of the assets, all of the sectors in society, and everybody ask themselves, the CEOs, middle management, municipal government, everyone has a role in supporting the giving and receiving of care. And Al and Vicky and Jerry from SIG, we were together this morning with some others to look at that question of how do you reveal and uncover the hidden assets in society that can be leveraged to support the giving and receiving of care. And before you do that, you have to decide that care is a universal issue, pertinent to absolutely every person, and you have to decide that there are none who are unworthy of care. So a large part of my book is about the worthiness of Nicholas Wright and other people, and not even just so much Nicholas, but particularly those with severe cognitive impairments, and that includes people with severe cognitive disabilities, severe mental illness, Alzheimer's and dementia, because there are plenty of moral philosophers and bioethicists who would argue that that what it is to be human is the capacity for practical reason. And if you don't have the capacity for practical reason, you are in effect not human. So what I began to look at as a prerequisite, really, for making the argument of why Nicholas should have a good life, is entitled to have a good life, and the support to do that was, is he human? Is he equal on the scale of humanity? And it wasn't that easy to find a theory of human equality, of moral personhood that applied to everybody, because the most obvious ones are religious, and that's no good for an atheist. So the theory of equality that I actually settled on was one from another disability mom who is a senior distinguished professor of moral philosophy at the State University of New York, and her name is Eva Kittay. And Eva is the mother, her daughter Sisha is 35 now and has severe cognitive disabilities. And Eva puts forward a theory of equal moral personhood that applies to absolutely everybody, notwithstanding their disability, that says we are all some mother's son. And she identifies the bond between the newborn baby and the mother as the core of civil society. And on that basis, we ascribe a certain human dignity, even to the worst criminals. We give them a priest to say a prayer before, we don't have executions in Canada, but in the United States, they would. There is some recognition of humanity, even in terrible criminals. So I really liked that idea. And Eva has written a lot about what it means to have a child with severe disability. And one of her ideas that I talk quite a lot about in the book as well is something that transformed my idea about what I should do, what is my duty to Nicholas. If I don't stay up and reposition him every 20 minutes, does it mean I don't love him? Isn't that my duty? Isn't it my duty to say that I won't have a paid employment? And if I say that all of these things, that I'm going to devote myself entirely, if I don't do that, does it mean I'm a bad mother? And I think most disability moms in the room would really identify with that. And I saw somebody blog the other day on an aging post, "Are you a dutiful daughter?" You know, we all feel the pressure of being dutiful in our loving relationships, even if being dutiful will put us in the grave, because it's impossible to meet the needs that are so great of another person sometimes. But what Eva said is she picked apart dependency work compared to your loving relationship. So she said it's okay to download dependency work to somebody else. And, you know, I go in nowadays when I'm talking to people and I'm saying, you know, we need more nursing care, or I don't have to advocate so much now because Nicholas is in a really, really terrific place. But when I was really advocating for more help at home and for proper living conditions for him with 24-hour awake nursing care, I said, I cannot do the dependency work. I want to be his mother. I cannot do the dependency work. That's what I can't do. And I think we need, as a disability community, as a caring community, understand that a loving relationship is something completely different from dependency work. We have a society that reviles dependency as a concept and champions independence. So, you know, the very unromantic idea of the real life dependency relations in families that are part of human life are a hard sell. But, you know, I think that we can do it. I think we can look for very creative models from much poorer countries with, you know, I think Liz Renzetti's husband, Doug Saunders, wrote a very interesting book on cities and some of the models of really creative problem solving that exist in world city slums. I'm not giving up on a caring society. I think we can get one. And I think we need to think about dependency differently. I think we need to accept it. You know, just like we have to accept the fact that we are all getting older. We all have to accept the fact that one day we will all die. It's a reality. So the giving and receiving of care is a beautiful reality in the human spectrum. And when I called my book The Four Walls of My Freedom, it was because I discovered the beauty of an intimate relationship through intense listening, watching, touching, caring for Nicholas, that I have to say I don't think I've experienced that anywhere else in my life, and it's been a huge gift to me. I believe that we are, as a disability caregiving community, the keepers of knowledge and wisdom that the rest of the world needs. I mean, look at the mindfulness movement. Everybody wants it. And we know all about mindfulness. We can teach. I think in terms of politically, what does this shift in ideas actually mean politically? We have a crisis of funding right now in Ontario, and we are going to have to shift, politically, and I believe sort of throw in the towel and reinvent systems of supporting our most vulnerable citizens. And I think we're ready to do that. I think the tipping point is here. We had a very productive and receptive conversation with some very senior bureaucrats this morning. I was very encouraged by that. And, I think we do need to think, though, what is the responsibility of the individual? What are the not only what is the responsibility of all the parties, but what are the assets? So what about the individual? What about the family? What's the responsibility to contribute to a family member's life? We have to think about what's right. And what are the assets we can bring to bear? So, and we have to be then, of course, allowed to spend those assets. You know, my mother is 92. She's not going to live much longer. She would like to leave a legacy to Nicholas. We have to figure that out. I mean, there are barriers to being able to leverage the wider assets in families who want to give to someone who is vulnerable. There are barriers to Nicholas having money, spending money. We're very blessed in Canada to have the Registered Disability Savings Plan. He hasn't had it quite 10 years yet, so we're not able to use that money yet. That's okay. But we certainly aren't allowed to contribute to his care. I'm not sure that we would financially be in a position to do that because his care is extremely expensive with 24-hour nursing care. But I would like to be able to have the choice to contribute to his care if we were able. So I think in terms of looking at the role of the private sector, looking at the role of the charitable sector, doing a kind of audit of society to see where are the assets that we could leverage for our most vulnerable citizens. And I think there are a lot of creative people who are actually thinking and working on these issues currently. And a lot of them are in Ontario, right here in Toronto. So I'm very pleased about that. There's a lot of good stuff happening in the UK too, by the way. Our family lived for 9 years in the UK, so I've written quite a bit about our experience there and looked at the comparison of how we managed to support Nick in the UK and in Canada. One good thing in the UK is that they've put health and social care together. You don't have to fight between ministries for support there. So that's a good thing, and that's recent too. I think one of the other idea that I want to talk about finally is simply a construct for what types of support do family need? If we were to use a phrase to describe the kinds of supports that families need to be able to have whatever good life they want individually, because the capability approach is really handy because it's an approach that allows each person to individually say realistically what they want in their own life. This is my choice. I don't want a wheelchair, I want a piano. People can make choices of what is valuable to them. So I would say that whatever policies, programs, and services, whatever we decide are the ways in which we as a society want to support our most vulnerable citizens, it should be least restrictive and most supportive. So that was the construct I came up with in terms of, okay, if you're going to make a policy, make it so that people can have their own personal solutions and don't put restrictions on, you can do this, but you can't do that. You can do that, but not this. So that was my framework idea for policy and program development. I think finally I just want to say that I've used our family experience as a lens to examine the experience of disability in Canada and the extreme experience of caregiving. I call myself an extreme caregiver. And I always took all of my lead, my inspiration, my thoughtful perspective. I have been fed by my son and my daughter too. But mostly Nicholas, because he is a very, very unique person. And I think when you're attached at the hip to someone that you are constantly supporting, physically, emotionally, every which way, you're brokering that person's relationship with the world 24/7. That has given me so much because of his amazing good humor and his persistence, his determination to be positive is simply incredible. So I think if we look at that, claim dependency as a normal part of human life, and decide that we want to embrace vulnerability and some uncertainty around independence in our society, we can take the lead in Canada. We've got the brains to do that, and we can create the circumstances for people to be welcomed into that conversation, to begin to reorganize the way that we give and receive care.